Welcome to The Lock Shop with Nielsen and Hustler, powered by Coolbet Canada.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Tuesday night episode of the Fantasy Football Extravaganza, a Lock Shop production, as always, brought to you by our wonderful partners at Coolbet. Huss, week one, fantasy football now behind us. I had 8 wins, I had 4 losses, and I had about 15 best ball leagues that I haven't even bothered looking at. How'd the week go for you, my man?
Honest to God, it could not have gone much better. I told you. I saw you on Friday. It was great to see you in the Peg. We had an incredible time at the Banjo Bowl. What an atmosphere. And then 2 wild back-to-back days filled with plenty of revelry, lots of touchdowns and wins. 8 teams, 7-1. And I'll be honest, the math, as we all know, once you get in a bunch of leagues, it's almost impossible to skew that far to the good. I'm sure it'll happen on the other side at some point. But, I mean, obviously in our league here and a few other leagues, I got Justin Jefferson. He went off. And never mind the fantasy. My guy right here, number 15, reminded everyone that rumors of the demise of Andy Reid's Chiefs were premature. Unbelievable game. Mahomes goes for 5 TDs. Not to mention, shout out to Coolbet, did tweet out before then, over 2.5 touchdowns for Mahomes was plus 140. Still can't believe we got that number at Coolbet, but we did. It cashed. So overall, I can't wait for week 2, especially considering what the Thursday nighter is. Maybe the game of the week is early this week. Chargers, Chiefs at Arrowhead. But overall, lots of fun. Did take one on the chin. You know, I was Elijah Mitchell invested in quite a few leagues, and now we'll get to the waiver wire, because if you're like me with Eli Mitchell, you got to figure out what you're going to do, because it doesn't look like he's going to be kicking around for a good portion of the season.
Yeah, we're going to give you your injury reports, hopefully the latest on 5 or 6 of the key injuries around the league that obviously impact your fantasy in one way or the other. We've got our favorite waiver wire targets of the week. We've got starts of the week from each of us at each position. And, of course, make sure if you're watching on the live stream right now, you subscribe to the Lock Shop podcast. That's where you're going to find the Fantasy Football Extravaganza. So make sure if you're not yet subscribed. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. And of all the streams that I do, the Fantasy Football Extravaganza has always been the most active one. Guys, just get fired up for fantasy. Poor Fat Dad is in and says, Cam Akers. Gosh darn Cam Akers. And T. Snivik's in and says, Dak goes down. Time to go full QB stream. Rest of season. Change my mind. And we'll discuss that as we get into the injury report. As for the Listener League, Huss, I managed to pick up a win. You managed to pick up a win. Mine was a little greasy because I think 3 or 4 of the guys who lost this week would have beaten me. I only ended up having 110 points this week, but I came away with the dub, which is all that matters.
Yeah, you were right. You actually only had more points than 2 teams in the league, but you're 1-0, and that's the beauty of the head-to-head format, although it sucks if you're on the wrong end of it. Yeah, shout out to the champ is here, who had a nice big win, 161 points for first place. The Golden Boys, yours truly, 158. Your man on this meat is 156. And then the Sucky Sucks and the AM Nasty Snacks both had nice scores, but it wasn't enough to get the dub. So 1-0. Some teams are 0-1. It's still very early. But as I said, it was downright horrible for some teams in fantasy football. I was showing this to you. But
you got to tell us about Jim Toth's team, buddy. Oh, man.
Yeah, exactly. And shout out to my guy, Toth. I don't mean to publicly expose him like this, but when you have a team that finishes this poorly, just to put it into perspective, I had in this league 164 points. My good friend Jim and the Hungarian Hammers had 37 points. Listen to this. Dak Prescott, 4 points, out for 2 months. Alvin Kamara, 3 points. Elijah Mitchell, 4 points, out for a month or two. DJ Moore, 4. Mike Williams, 1. Darren Waller, 7. Travis Etienne, 5. CeeDee Lamb, 2. Packers D, 0. And his top scoring player of the week was Raiders kicker Daniel Carlson. I mean, and the thing is, like, you know, there'll be a couple. This is a historic week, though. In the history of our league, this might be the worst of all time. And for it to happen in week 1, no buys, everybody healthy going in. Tough. I mean, it really was the perfect storm. But as we said, it is not how you start, it's how you finish. This week is huge. If you are a guy that has lost Dak Prescott, if you've lost Elijah Mitchell, you got to get on that waiver wire and hopefully make some moves and fix things, because there will be plenty of talent on the waiver wire that wasn't taken in your draft. And the key is to get on it tonight. So you see some results going into this week, and you actually might have a few live bodies. But RIP to Jim and everyone like him that had the bad luck of week 1 in fantasy football.
Jim Toth, one of my broadcast idols. I'm not even kidding. He was at Shaw TV in Cranbrook when I was in high school, and I was just like, I want to be Jim Toth one day and be on Shaw TV in Cranbrook too. So I've always had a really soft spot for Toth. He was terrific. Yeah.
He's one of my best friends, a great guy. That being said, I don't feel sorry for him for a second. Too bad.
Not at all. All right, let's take a quick look at the injury report. If you are watching the live stream, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're not yet signed up for an account at CoolBet, you might as well do that as well. Just use the code LOCKSHOP when you sign up for an account over there, and subscribe to the podcast on all your platforms. All right, so we got Dak. Dak originally looked like it might be 2 months. Tom Pelissero, I had him on my show today. He said he heard maybe only 4 weeks. Jerry Jones was saying it's 4 weeks. That's probably ultimate 100% best case scenario, but obviously it's a little bit better for Dak now than it was originally reported right after the injury. Elijah Mitchell looks like it's going to be 8 weeks for him. Najee Harris, it did not look good right away. They're saying there's a chance that he could now play in week 2. In week 2. T. Higgins, concussion protocol, got hurt in that game. We'll discuss that a little bit when we get into our waiver wire claims as well. Mac Jones' back is apparently improving. Keenan Allen missed practice again today, so that's another one that you can look at for all you Keenan Allen owners. We'll try to find something you can do there. Huss, just before we dive into, and a lot of the guys we'll talk about on the waiver wire are linked to these injuries, but biggest injury story coming out of week 1 for you. What do you think is the one that impacts the most people, I guess?
Well, I mean, listen, if we're talking about at the top of draft boards, it's got to be Najee Harris. And there was, I mean, obviously it wasn't thought that he was going to be lost for like the entire season. But, you know, and listen, with him potentially coming back for us, I think there's a risk involved as well. And let's face it, if you've got Najee Harris, you picked him in the first round. I mean, this was a guy that went off the boards mid-round 1 in most drafts. So that one certainly is. And, you know, the Elijah Mitchell situation reminds me of last year. Yeah. I mean,
every year with the Niners.
Raheem Mostert, but it was game 1 and came out, and a lot of people put in like literally their entire free agent budget to get Elijah Mitchell, and he ended up being very serviceable for the rest of the year. As we'll get to it, a little murkier right now, I think, somewhat in the San Francisco backfield moving forward, and the fact that they just signed Marlon Mack, who was just cut from the Texans to their practice roster.
Yeah,
there's a lot of bodies around there, so I think there's a less clear-cut guy coming out of it, although I think there's one that sort of stands above the others. But those two, and then, of course, I mean, the Dak Prescott one, not only does it, you know, affect the Cowboys in a huge way, but, for instance, a guy like Jim that had the stack of Dak and CeeDee Lamb, like, you had to be real concerned. There was a bunch of guys. I mean, Cam Akers, Allen Robinson, that was concerning. But for CeeDee Lamb, who's expected to be the guy this year, won't have Michael Gallup for a while, doesn't quite have the help that he's had before. I mean, he just wasn't getting open. That's the one thing. You look at what Cooper Kupp did in a game where nothing else really was happening very well for the Rams. He got open and caught like 13 balls. Justin Jefferson, everyone knows the football's going to him, and their offense creates openings to get him a little bit of space to get the football and make plays. They did that. There was none of that from CeeDee Lamb. And I would say this, I would have already been concerned about CeeDee if Dak hadn't had the game, if Dak hadn't gotten hurt. But now with Cooper Rush going in there, I'm really wondering how much you can count on any Cowboys offensive players for the next 4 to 6 weeks, depending on what happens with Prescott. And by the time he gets back, what's left of their season, luckily they're in the NFC East, so I don't think they'll be completely out of it by then. But ugly start for the Cowboys, scoring only 3 points, and it just got worse when we got that report about Dak Prescott.
Very much a concern as a guy who's got a lot invested in CD this year. I've talked about it a few times. He was targeted 11 times in that football game, but you mentioned it. On a lot of them, he wasn't open. Like he was contested. He only caught 2 of his 11 targets. So maybe there's a glimmer of hope that he was targeted a bunch, but he just wasn't getting open. Maybe that will change. But still, I'm not going to be like, I'm not sitting CeeDee Lamb in week 2 just because he doesn't have Dak. I'm going to ride that for a couple weeks to see what happens, and we'll see how it plays out after that. So that's a look at some of the key injuries. Huss, let's get into the waiver wire. We each have 3 waiver wire guys, and then we've got a start of the week at every single position for you as well. If you are listening right now or watching and you want to chime in on your starts of the week, who you like this week the most at each position, feel free. We'll read some of those on the air here as well. We have some questions from a little bit earlier on that we'll certainly get to tonight as well. But Huss, let's dive into this waiver wire, buddy. Where are you going?
Hey, before I get to mine, do you have the something on the San Francisco backfield?
Yes, let's do it. I do have. So
okay, let's start. Yeah. Let's start there because I think that's one that everyone's talking about. Elijah Mitchell was on just about everybody's teams, and you know, you've got Jeff Wilson, but there's also Mason there. Who is it? The TDP guy, and now Marlon Mack, who's been signed, albeit not to the active roster, but onto the practice roster with the ability as a veteran player to come off it potentially as early as this upcoming weekend.
It's an extremely frustrating situation, which is pretty much on par for the Niners backfield for like the last 3 or 4 fantasy seasons. So, you know, Jeff Wilson Jr., the hot topic, I had like 3 buddies text me this afternoon. They're like, Dusty, should I grab Jeff Wilson Jr.? I said, well, they are bringing in Marlon Mack. It is this Niners backfield where, you know, Elijah Mitchell, you know, managed to step in and surprise a lot of people last year. So basically, the frustrating part is that Jeff Wilson Jr. in 8 career starts has averaged 17 fantasy points per game. But I just worry that, you know, they list him as the starter and, you know, all of a sudden one of those 2 rookies ends up stepping up. I would, for sure, if you're in a deep league, that's got like a 9-player bench, or I'm in a 16-team league, in my 16-team league, and I think I'm on waiver wire priority 8, I'm going to stash Jordan Mason as a rookie running back there because Jeff Wilson Jr. doesn't have a great history of staying healthy either. And if Elijah Mitchell's going to miss 2 months. So I do have Jeff Wilson as one of my top 3 waiver priorities this week. He's the sexy choice this week. I do think this is a guy who can come in and help you this week. I think he's a guy who might be able to help you for 2 or 3 weeks, but I don't think you can go out. Let's say you're in a fab league and you get $100 budget. I would not in any way go out and drop 40 or 50 bucks on Jeff Wilson Jr., which means you're probably not going to get him because somebody else is going to do that, and that's fine. Let them do that. Jeff Wilson Jr. is not going to win you your league. Could he win you week 2? Yeah, he might be able to win you week 2. If you want to put out 14, 16, 18% of your budget, if you really need a running back or you're the Elijah Mitchell owner, that changes things there. Then yeah, I do that. But I'm not running to the waiver wire to get Jeff Wilson Jr. for the long-term stretch here. And I'm not disappointed if I don't get him. In a deeper league, I'd rather stash one of the 2 rookies.
Yeah. Now, listen, I am in that situation where I am Elijah Mitchell guy. And in most of my drafts, I am less deep at running back than I have been at other positions. And that might mean looking at some of the other guys and trying to make some sort of a trade. I do believe, I think in the free agent budget leagues that I've got $100, I think I've bid in and around the low 30s for Jeff Wilson. And
if you're the Mitchell owner, that makes sense, man.
Yeah, because I mean, listen, I want to have a guy even short term that I might legitimately have to put him in. And you know, he had 9 carries last week. Now, again, it was in the slop in Chicago, so I'm not sure how much we can take from that game. But listen, I will say this. I mean, doing some prep for this show today and reading about Mason, there is a lot of sharp people that think that in a short period of time, with the power running game that Shanahan likes and the type of player that he is, that he could be the guy getting the majority of the touches and carries. Listen, I don't think it's going to end up where there's a clear-cut guy, although that's exactly what happened last year with Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, that's true.
And we all remember everyone was so horny about Trey Sermon going into drafts and thought that he was going to be the guy. And then he barely even played at the beginning of the season, and Eli Mitchell ran away with it. So I do think that the probably safest pick right now is Jeff Wilson to try to get him on. But you're right. There is a lot of steam behind Mason, and this might be the opportunity where week 3, week 4, depending on what happens with Jeff Wilson, he might be a guy that all of a sudden is very, very fantasy relevant. So if you have the opportunity and you've got a spot on your bench to stash him, I don't think you're going to be starting him in the next couple of weeks, but I would certainly make an effort to get him on the to get him on the roster.
Yeah, the other two guys that I have, I'll hit my other two guys. I got another running back, and then I do have a receiver that I think is worth, for the next couple of weeks maybe. But I'm going to look at Chicago Bears running back Khalil Herbert, who was drafted in a lot of leagues. But, he's one of those guys that's around maybe 40% ownership in a lot of leagues, depending on the size of your league. And I was hoping at the beginning of the year, I have him in maybe 2 or 3 of my 14-team leagues. And I was hoping that he'd be a guy who might have like some flex standalone value if need be. And I think what we saw, and it's so tough to gauge what happened in that first game. It really is. I mean, it was a mess. But he outproduced David Montgomery with fewer touches, had a touchdown in that game. Last year when Montgomery, when he wasn't available, Herbert looked really good. So this is not a guy that I'm going to pick up and start this week. But this is a guy that if Montgomery goes down, potentially a monster. And even if Montgomery doesn't go down, I think there's a chance here that he just takes more and more work away from him. So, like I said, not a guy that you're probably going to pick up and start this week, but I do think Khalil Herbert might be a smarter play here for some point in the season. If you've got maybe you got a guy who got hurt and you didn't like him anyway as a fringe guy, and that's where I'd probably throw Khalil Herbert. And then just quickly, my other guy, with T. Higgins and concussion protocol, I do have Tyler Boyd kind of on the radar if he's available in your league this week. Basically, when T. Higgins is not available, Tyler Boyd he's money. I think last season in one of the games, he was like wide receiver 4 when given that opportunity. This past week, he was targeted a bunch as well because Higgins went out relatively early-ish into that game. They've got a nice matchup here in week 2. I really think this could almost be a one-off. Right, you go start Tyler Boyd for a week. If you're the Cincinnati Bengals, and I know I've read an article about an hour and a half ago, encouraging signs for T. Higgins concussion. And I always have an issue with encouraging signs for the concussion 3 days later. It just doesn't make any sense. So if you're the Bengals and you're going up against the Cowboys without Dak, why would you risk damaging T. Higgins any further? It doesn't make any sense. Tyler Boyd is more than capable. Give him a game. This is a guy I would pick up and at worst flex this week. And then, if Higgins is back, you drop him and nobody cares. So Khalil Herbert, Tyler Boyd, and Jeff Wilson, but with the thoughts of a long-term stash of Jordan Mason.
Yeah, couple things on those. Herbert, and again, like David Montgomery had 17 carries for 26 yards, a yard and a half. But again, it was in the slop. But in those same conditions, Khalil Herbert ran for 5 yards a carry. I mean, he was 45 on 9. And certainly Montgomery was more active in the running game. Even if you don't need him right now, if you're a Montgomery owner and have the opportunity to get Herbert, I would 100%. Do that because at some point, if he's out for a game or if he gets injured, Herbert all of a sudden becomes like a bell cow running back for the Chicago Bears. So that's certainly something to think about. And T. Higgins, I feel bad. I feel like I cursed him. He was one of my 2 picks from the lock shop on our touchdown prop. And it was just the worst. I'm watching all these other games, and I'm looking at the ticker. I go, oh, great. Oh, Burrow's been horrible. Oh, but they've got a touchdown. Who is it? T. Higgins comes up. No, not a touchdown. Out. Concussion. And that's the worst thing you can possibly see. So, listen, I'm glad you hit on Jeff Wilson because I think that Niners backfield is one of the biggest stories of the weekend. For running back, the guy that I'm targeting in plenty of leagues, especially if I have exposure to the rookie Dameon Pierce, is Rex Burkhead. And here's the thing about Burkhead. He's older, but he's very versatile, and they really seem to love him in Houston. And I think as much as we were all excited for what Dameon Pierce was able to do and the fact that he looked like he was the number 1 guy, it wasn't like he was the number one guy and there was nobody else. I mean, when you look at the snap count and the touch share, it was pretty much 50-50. Burkhead had 14 carries. Pierce had 11 carries. And Burkhead also caught 5 balls. So especially in a PPR league. Now, listen, I do think that Pierce, that was his first game in the NFL. I think that workload will rise. But for a very similar option, if you have that, he is a priority for me, because the minute, much like I was just mentioning with Montgomery, something happens to one guy, the other guy becomes a very startable player and a guy that, everyone in your league will want him if he's not already on your team. So I think there's some real intangibles with Rex Burkhead. Maybe he was a little under the radar with it being Houston and the tie that not a lot of people watched, but he would be a guy that I would look. And then the Washington receiver situation is fascinating. Now,
it is.
Jahan Dotson may or may not. I mean, he's a rookie. I mean, I think that in a lot of leagues, he probably is already picked up. And I believe he caught just the 3 balls, but 2
balls, but 2 of them for touchdowns. Yep.
Here's the thing, even more crazy. He had an 88% snap count for the game, was essentially there and was out there all game long. And, I think Wentz, certainly after he caught a couple touchdown passes, I mean, is going to be more inclined to go to him. If he's gone, though, the other guy that you might want to think about is Curtis Samuel. Now, Samuel's been injured basically for the last couple of years, and who knows, that could happen next week, and this entire conversation is moot. But when he wasn't on the field for as much as Dotson, however, when he was, he had a far higher route percentage of running passing routes as well as being targeted. And we've seen before, a healthy Samuel has been, a very effective player right now. So, when you see what happened with Washington, I mean, they gave up a bunch, and then, credit to Carson Wentz. He actually came back with a big second half, put up some legitimate fantasy points, and so did his receivers right now. So the guy that I'd be going for first is Dotson, but if he is not there and you're in a deeper league, Curtis Samuel, I think, could be a nice pickup for a guy that's been under the radar so far that could be impactful this year. And whether it's garbage time or whether it's coming back, if the first game of the year is any indication, there could be some points on both sides of the football in Washington games. And then, you know what? We should touch on the tight end position for a minute, because I don't believe there was any massive injuries. I mean, if you don't have one of those top tier guys, or if you have George Kittle that was on the bench, injured, you might be in a bit of a pickle. I spent quite a bit of time today going over, the games of the tight ends. I mean, the guy that I think, immediately has a lot of value is Everett from the I always want to call the Chargers the Clippers, just to kind of
not that
LA
different.
Chargers. With Keenan Allen likely out, Mike Williams had a quiet night, although Williams always gets targeted all night against the Chiefs. So I do expect him to have a big bounce back game on Thursday. You've got a couple other options, but I think the tight end certainly becomes a little bit more relevant. And I believe he had 3 for 54 and a touchdown last week. So, I mean, if you're in a passing offense like the Chargers have, there's going to be opportunities for a guy like that. And if you say, I'm getting the ball from Justin Herbert, even if you're this number 2 or number 3 or even number 4 option, probably worthwhile having on your team and probably has a much higher ceiling than a number of players. Robert Tonyan's another interesting guy from Green Bay. I was a guy in a lot of leagues where I left tight end right until the end. If I didn't get Kelsey, I just waited. So, I've got Evan Ingram one. I'm going to sort of move on him. So Robert Tonyan, while not having a huge game, I think if there's one thing we kind of learned from that Minnesota Green Bay game, Dusty, is that Aaron Rodgers was pissed off at all his young receivers. Yeah. And I don't know how much patience he has over the next little while. And listen, it's not like Tonyan is an experienced veteran player, but he's played with Rodgers a little bit. And I think there'll be more of a propensity to mix him into the passing offense as they sort of learn and try and, maybe go baby steps with the likes of Christian Watson and whatnot. So Tonyan is one guy. And then the other guy at tight end that probably is available in your league is Taysom Hill. And Hill was very, very impactful in that game. And, he's such a versatile guy. The guy's a little bit of a unicorn. I believe he only caught 1 pass but he also had 4 rushes for 81 yards and a touchdown, and is
Yeah.
used in so many different packages and looks right now that I really do think that he will be very much fantasy relevant going forward. Again, it'll be in a different way. He's not going to be a guy that just is running routes and catching passes, but they're going to find a way to get him the football. They're paying him a lot of money right now, and we saw that he can be a bit of a game breaker in game number 1. So Taysom Hill at the tight end position, as well as Everett and Tonyan, some good options if you're not satisfied with your team at that position right now going into tonight's waiver wire.
I quickly want to go back to Samuel, because like the Curtis Samuel we saw this week was the Curtis Samuel that I had in almost every single league at the beginning of last year. I was like, this is it. He's out of Carolina. They're going to use him the way that he should be used. And then, he just got hurt. They couldn't get him back. It was rumored throughout the whole year. It's like, Curtis Samuel going to be back week 13. Nope, he wasn't. Curtis Samuel going to be back week 15. Nope, he wasn't. I absolutely loved seeing the way they used Curtis Samuel in that offense. And I think it opened up a lot of things. Like Antonio Gibson had a really nice game, caught 7 balls out of the backfield. Carson Wentz bloody well threw 4 touchdown passes, which was insane. So I'm fully on board with the Curtis Samuel love. It pisses me off because he's available in my 16-team league. And he's going to be one of the first 2 or 3 guys off waiver wire. I don't know how I missed him in the draft. It pissed me off.
Well, and not only he caught 8 passes, albeit for just 55 yards and a touchdown, but he had 4 rushes too.
Yeah.
So, listen.
Poor man's Debo.
I was just about to say, that the NFL is such a copycat league. They're seeing what happened with Debo Samuel last year, and they're looking for guys, especially if you've got average quarterbacking or worse. Maybe the easiest way to get the football into these guys' hands is to hand it to them in the backfield. So Samuel had a big game, was very much involved in that offense. And, listen, if Carson Wentz can get his act together, but take care of the football, between Terry McLaurin, Samuel, and Dotson, a tight end and Logan Thomas that I like, and Antonio Gibson that actually was pretty darn good. Maybe, just maybe, we have a fantasy relevant team in Washington that no one was really expecting going into drafts this year.
Which would be fun. It'd be crazy over the first couple of weeks if that happens. People will be scrambling to get a piece of it. We'll see how it continues to play out. They do get the Detroit Lions this week, so we'll see how that plays out. All right, starts of the week, Huss. Let's go position by position. Where do you want to start? We start at quarterback? Want to start at quarterback or what?
Well, yeah, sure. Let's start at quarterback. And, I think for the purposes of this, I think we're just going to identify a really good matchup. Certainly for those of you that are playing DFS, the cash values will be different. I think we're sort of making it more for regular season-long fantasy.
And just so you know, Travis Kelce is always our tight end start of the week. We'll give you some other guys, but it's always that guy. You know what I mean? So we try to find some guys. I've got 2 wide receivers and a running back that are 100% must start this week. They're going to start him anyway, but I want to talk about him a little bit. I got a tight end that you're probably going to be starting, and then I got a quarterback that I'm expecting maybe a little bit of a better game from. So, that's kind of potential to be the number 1 guy at their position this week. Let's just say that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for my and I obviously do love DFS and play a lot of DFS, and I've been, screwing around with some of the optimizers and looking at projections and stuff. And these are guys that I think have particularly good matchups that if you have the option of anyone and you're thinking DFS, guys that you might want in. And I'm going to start off with Carr in the Vegas.
I like that.
Going up against the Cardinals. And I'll tell you this, and I may as well tie this into my tight end pick because it's Darren Waller. We saw Travis Kelce, and again, Kelce abuses pretty much most defenses that he goes up against, and Mahomes was in absolutely vintage form, so maybe it's difficult to call him too much. But if you went back to last season, the Arizona Cardinals could not stop tight ends. It was a huge, huge issue for them. Now, they'll obviously want to improve on that, and maybe they do. It certainly didn't happen very much in week 1. But when you consider that, they were going up against a Chargers team that has a healthy Derwin James, Khalil Mack that was in the backfield all afternoon along with Joey Bosa, I think going up against a much softer Arizona defense that we saw get carved by the Chiefs on the weekend is an unbelievable matchup for Carr and Waller. And listen, Devontae Adams had 35 targets. I don't know what the number was, but he had, I mean, a ridiculous amount. I believe it was 13 or 14 catches, 140 yards. It's negligence if they don't double cover that guy. And I imagine he'll be getting a ton of, no, he's still going to get the football, but I think that is going to open up even more opportunity for a guy like Waller, who was a very quiet guy in week number 1. So I think huge day. I'll be stacking those guys in DFS. If you've got Carr, I'm in a league where I've got Carr and Rodgers. Easy start Carr this week, and Waller on the tight end side of things. Where are you going at QB?
Well, I'm going to go with Russell Wilson against Houston. He goes home after the loss in Seattle and gets the Houston Texans. I'm going to ride with Russell Wilson for a second week in a row. Look, what do you have, 340 passing yards? Like, they didn't punch anything in except for the one that he underthrew to Jerry Jeudy, which wasn't great. But the Denver Broncos moved the ball consistently. They just happened to fumble at the 1 yard line twice, which didn't look good.
And you know, vintage Melvin Gordon, by the way. Yeah. Vintage Melvin Gordon. Yeah. The king of 1 yard fumbles.
And Javonte looks like an excellent apprentice. I thought that was, I mean, Javante's a monster. He looked great. But I loved Twitter last night when people are like, that's why you don't give it to Melvin Gordon at the goal line. And then they give it to Javonte, and that poor bugger fumbled too. That was a tough spot. But, like, I know they didn't win. I think Russell Wilson going home will obviously have something to prove after the week that he just had. They took the ball out of his hand. I could see Russ throwing 3 touchdowns this week and throwing for over 300 yards again. So, yeah, I'm on Russell Wilson as my start of the week in week 2 against Houston.
You know what? I was out way too late last night to get up to listen to your show this morning, but I wished I did, because I imagined about half of it was how, I mean, Nathaniel Hackett, for your first game as a head coach on Monday Night Football, with Peyton Manning and Shannon Sharp watching on the Madden cast as you make one of the most inexplicably stupid. Dude, when your son Marshall starts playing Madden 3 times a day in a couple years, he'll be able to tell you, you got to go for that. You're not kicking at 64 yards. I think the numbers on that were Russell Wilson's completion percentage in 4th and 5 situations was something like 68%. And the connection rate of a 64-yard field goal was 4.1%. I mean, that is one of the all-time bonehead coaching decisions, and it was in his first game as head coach. And of course, today he owned it and said, in retrospect, that was probably a bad idea. I mean, I guess, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
But listen, I'm glad you mentioned Russell Wilson, because while we're talking about Denver, I'm going to go to my start of the week, and it is Javonte Williams. Now, listen, part of it is going up against Houston. Jonathan Taylor ran wild over them, despite the fact that they were in a comeback situation. And, you know, Houston was up 20-3, and, you know, the Colts battled back to tie, but not win. But here's the thing about Javonte, and I was choked. I had the over on rushing yards, and if you look at his rushing yards, it wasn't really that particularly good. It was 43 yards. He had some great coach, but he only carried 7 times.
Yeah.
A little closer, he caught 11 passes. Now, Wilson is such a diva and is so focused on propping up his own stats. This is a perfect way of taking the running game and at least getting credit on your passing numbers for let's ride Russ. So while I think it is basically selfish, it's great for fantasy players. If he's going to turn what are normally carries into passes and you get a half point or a point for a reception, go nuts. This guy is the real deal. And as bad as that fumble was, the good thing was they don't have anyone that's got more sure hands, because the other guy's Melvin Gordon, and he was running like a tank at times. I mean, so hard to bring down, even by a Seattle defense that was playing their asses off last night. So I'm sort of with you on a big bounce back game for the Broncos. I think Javonte Williams will be heavily, heavily involved, whether it's technically rushing or receiving. It doesn't matter for fantasy purposes. And he is going to be a problem, I think, for a lot of teams so far this year. As long as he can hang on.
I wasn't out late last night. I I watched that game and I still didn't realize it as I was watching it. This morning, I'm breaking it down on the show and I saw 11 catches for Javonte Williams. I was like, what the hell? He had 11 catches out of the backfield. That was nuts. But point well taken on Russ. There's a spot here where we both hit on our start of the weeks with the Denver Broncos. I'll stick with my running back here quickly. And it's a guy who, from a fantasy perspective, because he's not in a split. He carries the ball a ton, but there is a touchdown vulture just waiting for him in Kareem Hunt. But as far as straight up running backs go, there are not many in the league better than Nick Chubb. And this past week for Nick Chubb, he did all the work. 22 carries, 141 yards, averaged 6.4 yards per carry in a win over the Carolina Panthers. Kareem Hunt got the ball 11 times on the ground, 4.2 yards per carry, but had the touchdown, had 4 catches. Chubb actually had 1 catch on a couple of targets, I believe, as well in this game. But now he gets the New York Jets. No, not the New York Jets. Who's Chubb play this week? I just had it laid out. I wanted to. He gets the Jets. Yeah, exactly. He gets it's the Jets. Are you sure it's the Jets? Why am I? Yeah, I'm blanking on this. Okay.
Jets at Browns. Yeah, and they just painted that new Brownie the Elf at center field, the First Energy Stadium, to welcome everyone there.
I saw that. That was something else. I guess can we just say that? That's something else. I love Nick Chubb this week. Yeah, that's exactly what they should do. I love Nick Chubb this week. Kareem Hunt's going to get a lot of touchdowns. They're going to take it away. If Kareem Hunt didn't exist, Nick Chubb's a top 5 fantasy running back, no doubt in my mind. But I nothing against the Jets. I know they held the Ravens to 24 points. I think Nick Chubb is going to run all over them as well. Deshaun Watson waits to get back. He's just going to sit there and watch Nick Chubb carry this team and get the hell beat out of him. And maybe he wears down by week 5, 6, or 7, but this is week 2. It's against the Jets. He's coming off a game in which he averaged more than 6 yards per carry. I really like him this week. If he finds the end zone once to go with 130 or 140 yards, you're really liking what you're getting from Nick Chubb this week.
You know what? To be honest, I was watching that game and just kicking myself for not getting a future on Nick Chubb to lead the league in rushing yards this year. I mean, he won't get as much passing. A lot of that's going to go to Kareem Hunt. And Kareem's a guy that's sort of been in and out of the lineup. When he's in, he can be very, very effective. But Nick Chubb is a horse. The fact that they don't have Deshaun Watson and what he can do throwing the football, I think makes him even more valuable to the team. And, we don't spend a lot of time talking about it, but, they've built a pretty damn good offensive line there in Cleveland. And that's going to be the recipe going forward. Less Jacoby, more Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And I think we'll see a lot of that this week as they try to get to 2-0. For my wide receiver of the week, a start that, again, if you're doing DFS, I think, despite he was only 5,500 last week, he'll be more this week, but still underpriced, is Michael Pittman. And Pittman last week in that game against the Texans he had 9 receptions for 121 and a touchdown. Clearly already the favorite of Matt Ryan. And you go up against a team in the Jacksonville Jaguars that got torched by Carson Wentz and the Washington Commanders. So do the math. I mean, the one thing that could impact this is just Jonathan Taylor going for 250 yards, which I guess is possible. But I think Matt Ryan knows you got to keep all your stars happy, spread it around. I think Pittman has a big, big game and, starts out and, like the big money receivers in fantasy all went off last week. If you had Diggs, you had Jefferson, you had Kupp, you had Adams, and you all got massive numbers. Pittman was in a sort of a tier below those guys.
I couldn't believe he was only 5,500, buddy. I saw it. I had him in a bunch of lineups.
I know. Yeah. Listen, it was strange. And sometimes there is the pricing on DraftKings, and I don't play a lot of FanDuel, but on DK, I find that early in the year, especially for guys that just started last year or who are rookies, you take your chances somewhat because they aren't as established, but you're getting it at a real discount. And, if you were able to get Justin Jefferson and Pittman on your team, you were right up there, and it was very doable with the salary numbers. I mean, honestly, he should be $400 or $500 below the Jeffersons and the Kupps on the the spot that he's got on that Indy offense right now. So listen, from a DFS perspective, absolutely. If you've got Pittman on your team, I'm sure you're starting him anyways, but be excited for Michael Pittman going up against the Jags in week 2. And I have a feeling that Indy team will be somewhat ornery for a couple reasons. First of all, they tied the Texans. And let's not forget how their season ended last year with Carson Wentz losing to the league's worst team in a game that they had to win to make the playoffs. And that was the way they came back after that entire offseason. I think they win, but I am very much unsure of the Colts overall as a team after that perplexing start to the season, considering what we expected of them the way last season ended for them.
I am torn on my wide receiver. I've got 2 names sitting in front of me, and I think I know which way I'm leaning, but you can make a great case for both of them. So this is the guy that I'm probably not going to take, but he should have a monster game anyway. And I mean, you gotta really like Deebo Samuel this week, don't you? I mean, they lose their running back, and they have a guy who they essentially use as a running back listed as a wide receiver. Like, this could be a 12, 13, 14 carry game for Deebo. And then everything else that they're going to use him through the air. So I think Deebo could be in for an absolutely monster game considering the current running back situation for the Niners this week. They're at home against the Seahawks. So Deebo's the one guy that I'm having a hard time getting away from. But I smirked a little bit earlier because you mentioned my guy that I am going to go with this week, and it's Mike Williams against the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, Keenan Allen missed practice again. You said it earlier. Mike Williams has had a great history of doing extremely well against the Kansas City Chiefs, was not involved at all in any sort of level that you would have expected him to be last week. I'm expecting this to be a high-scoring game if Keenan Allen's not there. And I know there was a few other guys that kind of surprised a little bit, Carter and among some other guys. Palmer was kind of non-existent in that game. But Mike Williams should be a target monster against the Kansas City Chiefs, I would think. So as much as I like Deebo, and considering the carries, Deebo might be the better play, I can't get myself away from Mike Williams against the Chiefs on Thursday night, buddy.
Well, shout out to my boy Jeff Feinberg. You can check out what he does with Pat Mayo over at the Mayo Media Network. Yep. Feinberg and I always go at it this week. He, of course, is a Chargers psycho. I am a Chiefs psycho. This is a huge game for both of us. He tweeted this out a little earlier today, and I'll credit him and give him a follow at GFeinberg17. Mike Williams with Justin Herbert in the last 3 games against Kansas City, targeted 9 times, albeit only catching 3 for 49. The next game, targeted 9 times for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then targeted 7 times, caught 6, 108, and 1 touchdown. I think both these teams are going to score some points. And here's the other thing. The Chiefs star rookie corner McDuffie got hurt, has been put on IR today, was incredible in coverage last week against Arizona, but he's not going to be there. Now, I'm not sure. I mean, we'll kind of learn more 3-4 games in as to, how Spags, kind of assigns those guys. But even without Keenan Allen, it's sort of an equal loss on both sides. And I think Mike Williams becomes even more a primary target for Justin Herbert. And listen, if they're going to win this game or be in this game, they're going to have to score a bunch of points. And I'm sure the Chiefs feel the exact same way going up against a pretty good revamped defense that fell apart last year. But a big part of that was, guys like Bosa hurt, and particularly Derwin James, who, for my money, might be the best safety in the NFL.
All right, and then quickly, my tight end. You hit your tight end earlier because you had a little Carr Waller stack. My tight end is going to be Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Second on the team in targets last week. Led him 5 catches, 75 yards. I think it was about 20 more yards than Deontay. Deontay was targeted 12 times. Freiermuth was targeted 10 times in that game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, when you look at their current personnel, Chase Claypool, I think, was targeted 6. Nobody else was targeted more than 3. I'm not exactly sure. Like, I don't think all of a sudden they're going to start going to Chase Claypool much more. You're already going to Deontay 12, 13, 14 times probably in a game. There's targets to be had there. And, is Freiermuth going to get 10 every game? No, but is he going to become a tight end that gets targeted 7 or 8 times per game? If that's the case, man, he's got the overall skill set and physical tools to be a tight end 7-8 this season. Does he get into that top 5? No, because he doesn't have the quarterback play to get that done. But I think in the situation that he's in, and the skills that he brings to the table, I think Freiermuth's a guy that I don't know he would have been. That's a guy you could have waited on, took in like 13th round if you didn't have a tight end, similar to a Cole Kmet type. Most people probably like Freiermuth maybe a little bit more. But he gets New England this week, coming off a week where he clearly clicked with the new quarterback there. So, I'm going to say Freiermuth, not going to be your wide receiver 1, but he's going to be a value play that can end up being, or tight end 1, but he's going to be a value play that could end up being, top 6 tight end this week. And then you're laughing for what you're going to spend on him in those situations. So.
Yeah, I'm going up against the Patriots. I mean, I'm just looking at his DraftKings number. He's the 8th highest priced tight end on Sunday's slate. So that's no Travis Kelce.
Who's below him? Who's below him, Huss?
So we've got Andrews, Kittle, who's out, Waller, Pitts, and his 1 point from last week. That sucked. Dalton Schultz, Hawkinson, Zach Ertz. And again, Hawkinson's 4,700, Ertz is 4,500. Freiermuth is 4,400. And then the guys below him, Gesicki, Higbee, Fant, Brait, David Njoku at 3,700, to be honest, is a little bit intriguing. Albert O's there, Hunter Henry. But you're right. That's
a big drop-off after Freiermuth, in my opinion.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah, so that's the tight end that I would look at for my start of the week. Let's dive into a couple of questions that came in here before we wrap up this episode. Let's see here. Is Amari Cooper droppable until Deshaun Watson is back? Huss, I know Amari Cooper was going like 6th, 7th round this year, but I mean, I'm not dropping Amari Cooper after 1 week and waiting until Deshaun Watson is back. You can't full-blown panic after week 1. And to me, that would be a little bit of a panic move. If you were to drop Amari Cooper, he would be scooped up by Thursday. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Now, if you're asking, can you count on Amari Cooper to be consistent week in and week out? I'm saying no to that. But as an asset, I think you'd be nuts to drop him. And I don't think there's anybody on the waiver wire that right now is going to, unless you're in a really small league with short benches. Maybe there are a bunch of other guys, but I think in most standard 12-team leagues with average size benches, Amari Cooper definitely should have a spot on your team. And listen, I think they're going to run the football quite a bit, but the more you run the football, the more you open it up for your playmakers as far as the wide receivers go. It's just a bad spot for Cooper this year with Brissett being the guy and having to wait as long as they will for Deshaun Watson to come off suspension.
Let's get to a couple more. This one was in from the Foys on Twitter. He's in our league, I do believe. Rodgers or Lance? Thanks. I'll hang up and listen.
Hey, you know me. I've been very skeptical, or I've been not sold on Trey Lance. I'm not saying that he doesn't have talent. I'm not saying I saw Mike Martz talk about him yesterday in the game that he had, and that was scary as hell if you're a Niner fan or a Trey Lance owner. I'm not sure he's comfortable reading defenses yet, and that's part of the reason why he ended up running 13 times in that game, which obviously is going to give a guy some pretty significant fantasy value. But I mean, realistically, I mean, we're not looking for a running back. You're hoping for a guy that'll, maybe run for 60, 70 yards, but also pass for 250 and a few touchdowns. Listen, they lost to the Bears on the road last week. They blew a 10-0 lead. They did nothing in the second half. If it goes poorly this week against the Seattle Seahawks, and listen, Seattle was way better than I expected them to be. The defense absolutely balled out. And if you go back and look at the history between these teams, Pete Carroll, Kyle Shanahan, the Seahawks are often a serious problem for San Francisco. So I'd go Aaron Rodgers. I'd go Aaron Rodgers against the Bears. I believe that's a primetime game, either Sunday or Monday. Rodgers will want to remind everyone that he still owns the Bears and come back from a tough first week. Listen, I realize it's still going to be growing pains for Dubes and Christian Watson. They're in Green Bay, but I'll trust Aaron Rodgers quite a bit more than Trey Lance. The ceiling on Lance is probably higher long-term and for this season.
Yeah, long-term, yeah.
But right now, you're talking about a guy to start week 2, considering what we saw in week 1. I think the safe bet is Aaron Rodgers for a bounce-back game more than Trey Lance.
One more time, Aaron Rodgers, Sunday night primetime at home against the Chicago Bears. End of discussion. He could be throwing to you and me, Huss, and he's going to kick the shit out of the Bears. Can you believe Nielsen? 7 catches on 9 targets from Aaron Rodgers, and they used Huss in a Debo role. It was amazing. And then one more. Let's get to one more. It comes from Bronco Nick. He's on the live stream. He hit us up a little bit earlier. Winston or Stafford? I think he means this week, and if he does mean this week, it's Stafford this week. He's got a much better matchup. Winston's going up against the Tampa Bay Bucks. You know, always scaring me a little bit there for Jameis Winston. I like Jameis. I don't like not in many leagues do I actually have a backup quarterback because a lot of these guys you just stream. But in a few of my deeper leagues, I do have Jameis riding along in the bench. I think there's going to be some big games for him along the way. But this week, you got to go. You got to go with Matthew Stafford this week. He gets the Atlanta Falcons at home in LA again. I'm a 100% on Stafford this week. Huss, what do you think about that conversation overall?
Yeah, listen, Jameis put up 200 yards or whatever in the fourth quarter.
In the fourth quarter,
he did not look great. He did not look great the entire game. And listen, the Falcons do what the Falcons do, and that's choke and blow massive leads. They were up 16 points late in the game, and we all know how that ended. But I'll say this, I was incredibly concerned. I mean, I don't know how, if you're invested in anything other than Cooper Kupp, you could have left that Thursday night game. The Super Bowl champs at home, after looking as bad as they did, doing literally everything except throw the ball to Cooper Kupp. I mean, you'd have to think that things will get better for Allen Robinson. I mean, they'll open things up for him. They can target him. And, if you're an Akers owner, I know you're concerned. I mean, he was clearly the number 2 guy in that game. But yeah, for this week, considering the matchups, I'll go with Matt Stafford. But I'll say this, I think if you're a Matt Stafford owner right now, and he's just your guy and you're counting on him to be your guy all year long, this might be a good time to take a look at the waiver wire and see what else is out there. Not necessarily dropping Stafford, but get another guy in because, hey, there was a lot of talk about his shoulder and his arm going into the season. And I don't know, I didn't see that rocket arm that we have been used to seeing Matt Stafford in the game 1 against the Buffalo Bills. So I would be concerned, and I would be making contingency plans if there is more to it, that you've got a guy, as opposed to, having everyone in the league know full well that you're screwed at quarterback and betting you over.
All right, there you go. That is going to do it for another episode of the Lock Shop's Fantasy Football Extravaganza. I just want to take a look at our Listener League schedule this week and see who I am playing in week 2. Dusty's Destroyers at 1-0 takes on Dirty Randy at 1-0. And Huss, who do you got? The Golden Boys get the AM Nasty Sacks this week in the Listener League.
And you know what's wild? The projected total in this game, 134.4 for me, 133.9 for
Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes, my man. That's that matchup. That's a good one.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm sure we're both happy that we didn't play each other last week, considering the week that those two guys had. Allen at home to Tennessee. And of course, man, this game on Thursday night, I could talk about it for hours. It is going to be, if you recall, Mahomes, just to remind everyone, has never lost on the road in the AFC West, has only 2 losses ever in the division, both at Arrowhead. One, a bizarre fluke game to the Raiders, but the other one that was a legit loss was Justin Herbert kind of announcing his arrival last season. This is going to be amazing. 2 of the best teams in the National Football League going at it in prime time. I cannot wait. And I'll tell you what, there's going to be some serious fireworks, I think, in those DraftKings showdown contests with so much to
Oh, that'll
choose
be
from
fun.
as we get ready for that Thursday night slate. And then, of course, another big weekend beginning on Sunday. Oh, and by the way, I'm not sure if you knew this. Monday Night Football doubleheader next week.
It is a doubleheader. That's right. I saw that too. I saw that yesterday.
This year. Yeah, we've got the Eagles taking on the Vikings, and that's a 7:15 or 7:30 game that's going to be on ESPN or on ABC, I should say. And then the other game, I'm just going to get back to it. The other game, Tennessee at Buffalo, that is a 6:15, so I guess 5:15 start out your way. So we'll sort of have the second half of the first game going at the same time as the first half. I would have liked it to maybe be able to watch the entire thing, but listen, I'll take it. I mean, I'd much rather have 8 games instead of 9 at noon and give me 2 Monday nighters. And listen, we're going to get a chance to see Derrick Henry, Josh Allen, Justin Jefferson, and this Eagles team that a lot of people are high on. That being said, they weren't good enough to cover the number against your Detroit Lions, who came through with me in the lock shop. So I was quite happy about that. And I still believe in the Lions for this season to be a competitive team and probably a good one against the number.
All right, that is going to do it for our Week 2 preview episode with the Lock Shop's Fantasy Football Extravaganza. We've got a CFL preview episode coming your way tomorrow, so watch for that in the Lock Shop podcast feed. It's all brought to you by our partners, great partners at CoolBet. Sign up for an account today. Use the code LOCKSHOP if you've not yet signed up. Huss, we'll talk some 3-down football tomorrow, buddy. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, hey, just quickly on CoolBet, obviously, if you use the code LOCKSHOP, you get a 100% bonus on your first deposit up to $200. No better time to get that right now. But there's also a promo right now running that if you bet $25 on football over the course of the week, you'll get a free bet as well. And obviously, I did that last week, and I was just making my CFL picks before we started. And there's the little thing, use your free bet. So if you're betting $25, you'll get another one afterwards, whether you win or lose. Another great bonus from our friends over at CoolBet right now, the most transparent sports book around.
We will talk to you tomorrow.